As many of you know, my family is from South Korea. I don't know how to say stop the steal in South Korean, but it sounds like I may have to be learning because if you thought that Donald Trump had the monopoly on stop the steal, well, I'm here to tell you that democracy is under attack in foreign countries, including places like South Korea, where you thought, at least I did, that democracy would actually still be pretty healthy and intact in those places. So let's kind of break it down a little bit so you understand what I'm talking about. I've said recently that we need to focus on international news and media. Why? Because there's a lot of stuff that is going on about which it's either mirroring what we've been going through here in the United States, or it's stuff that Donald Trump is trying to mimic himself. Viktor Orban, for example, right? He's picking up tips from other countries, autocratic countries, dictatorships. He's trying to learn from Vladimir Putin and others. And because of that, we should be focusing as well and spending some time talking about these other countries because it's a little too isolationist and it's frankly a little bit arrogant to think that the United States operates in a vacuum without having any influence externally or getting influenced by other countries. The reason why we're talking about this is, if you'll recall, back in December of 2024, the president of South Korea at the time, Yoon Suk-yeol, announced that he was imposing martial law. Now, we've talked about the threat of convicted felon Donald Trump doing the same, imposing martial law in the United States. So the president of South Korea at the time went ahead and did it. He declared martial law and he deployed troops to South Korea's election commission. And so it was a federal building in Seoul, and he deployed troops to block entry into that building. He accused the opposition at the time, which was in large part controlling the National Assembly. He accused them of, quote, trying to overthrow the free democracy. So stop for a second. You have a sitting president in South Korea saying, I'm declaring martial law because I don't like what the opposition is doing. Sound like something we've heard here, right? So the reason why there's consequences, though, in South Korea that we're not seeing here in the United States is after he declared martial law, that didn't last very long. If you'll recall, once he did that, he immediately basically had to backpedal it, and he was indicted. He was impeached and indicted because of his attempts to lead an insurrection when he briefly imposed martial law in December. So Yoon was the very first sitting South Korean president to be indicted and criminally investigated. And of course, his defense team said, this was actually our ability to do free speech. This is our ability to fight back against corruption. And this investigation was politically motivated. I mean, gosh, people, does that sound familiar? Does that sound like he's echoing Donald Trump there? And then the Korean lawmakers, after Yoon had declared martial law, overturned his decree. And he just kept on saying, no, but there are anti-state and corruption activities by the opposition, and that's why we had to do the martial law. But then the truth comes out. There was testimony obtained from government officials in the following weeks throughout that investigation into Yoon, and it showed that he was intending on using martial law to be able to target his political opponents and to pursue, quote, baseless election fraud claims. Again, echoing and mimicking what we've seen from Donald Trump. He ordered troops to block lawmakers from going into the assembly to be able to overturn his martial law decree. I mean, this is some serious shit, people. The use of troops to be able to block political opposition, it's some very scary stuff. So on January 18th of 2025, Yoon is arrested, the first South Korean president to be arrested while currently in office, placed into custody, and then an independent agency called the Corruption Investigation Office for High-Ranking Officials led a criminal probe, and he ended up getting indicted. But let's again talk about the ties that bind or the links that we're finding between the United States and South Korea. South Korean right-wing YouTubers, and this is according to Media Matters, which is a fantastic organization, by the way, that tracks this information. South Korean right-wing YouTubers, you know what they're doing now? They're actually fueling claims that there's some election fraud that was going on or that there's some corruption going on because they're starting to use phrases that are borrowing from the United States, from MAGA, like stop the steal. go the reason at the beginning of this video, I said maybe I need to learn how to say stop the steal in Korean so we can talk about it. So how do we know this? Well, Media Matters is reporting that as recently as December 9th, right after the, attempts to impose the martial law, there was a founder of a right-wing organization here in the United States called Truth Vote. They hosted a South Korean grad student who was on a podcast with this right-wing organization. That South Korean graduate student claimed, quote, the same enemy stole our elections in South Korea and the United States too. So this bullshit about stolen elections, well, listen, it's not dead in the United States, and it's actually having its own kind of renaissance in South Korea. Then in May of this year, after Yoon was removed from office, another guy by the name of Kim Jong-hyun, who goes by the name Alfred Kim in his American appearances, he went on Rumble, on a podcast on Rumble. He identified himself as, quote, the founder of the White Skull Squad, which has been described as a far-right youth group. During his appearance, Kim said that his organization is similar to the Proud Boys and that they were standing up for election integrity, again, echoing what we have here in the United States. He compared the situation in South Korea to January 6th, to the insurrection. And then later on, Kim, this South Korean guy from this organization called the White Skull Squad, he then went on a podcast with Enrique Tarrio, who was the founder or the chair of the Proud Boys. And he said on that podcast, quote, we have to forbid this electronic machine worldwide. We have to stop it. And I believe Donald J. Trump can do it right away. And he said, quote, it's so crucial that President Trump and MAGA patriots are on our side. He then said that they're planning to establish a White Skull Squad in the States. I mean, again, we need to talk about how this stuff is happening. This stuff is happening in other countries, and it's mimicking, it's echoes, it's very real comparisons to what we've been through here in the United States. And it just goes to show that Donald Trump and his Stop the Steal messaging is not just limited to the United States. It's actually having consequences outside of the borders of the United States. And at the same time, these far-right South Korean people, they're coming here to the United States and they're fomenting that same insurrection energy here in the United States. So what's happening now is something incredibly unusual. In South Korea, they're actually having presidential elections, and they're not there. It's an off time, right? And the reason why is because the sitting South Korean president, he was impeached. He was removed from office. And now they're having this race for a new president. And I want to tell you this. In South Korea, the president served a single 5-year term. This is according to the Washington Post. There are currently 5 candidates that are running, and it's the first presidential contest in 18 years without a woman who is running. Now, the front runner, the good news is this guy, Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party. Lee actually lost the presidency in 2022 to the impeached president, Yoon, by the narrowest of margins, according to WAPO. Now, there's a conservative party called the People Power Party. That guy has actually, he's getting really close in the latest polls in terms of support. Lee Jae-myung of the Democratic Party is at 49%, and Kim Moon-soo of that conservative People Power Party, he's at 40%. Now, the Democratic Party currently controls the National Assembly, and they're the ones that launched all these impeachment motions against the Yoon administration and his officials after all of his attempts to declare martial law, etc. But here's the thing that's really interesting. Collectively, everybody agrees in South Korea that this is a referendum on former President Yoon. But it says here, both major candidates have vowed to pursue a constitutional amendment to curtail the power of the president. The most decisive factor influencing voter sentiment appears to be the issues of martial law and impeachment. So, and of course, the issue of Trump and the tariffs on South Korean products is also kind of looming large in this election. But I want to talk about this for a second, right? So you actually have candidates for a democratic government in South Korea that are saying that issues like martial law and impeachment and whether the impeachment was excessive, like those are the critical issues for an election. And you think about the fact that, yes, the tariffs are also an important issue, but really at this time, it's whether or not there should be an amendment constitutionally to curtail the powers of the president. Why in the hell are we not doing the same damn thing here in the United States? Why are we not appreciating the risks inherent to having a president of a country like former President Yoon in South Korea, who invoked martial law to be able to curtail and to be able to go after his political opponents? Isn't that exactly what we've been having with Donald Trump? Donald Trump usurping our branches of government. Donald Trump, abusing his privileges. Donald Trump basically abusing his powers as an executive to be able to punish his political opponents, to be able to advance his political agenda to come hell or high water the way that he wants to do it. So what's fascinating is we like to think in the United States that we're so far advanced in terms of being as compared to other countries, and yet doesn't it seem like we're so far behind? We're so far behind these ideas, which really are not progressive, and they certainly shouldn't be novel, but we're so far behind these ideas that we should be in a place where constitutional amendments are done, where you have to curb the powers of a president. So we're going to see what ends up happening in South Korea. And again, I want to talk about these things because I think they're really important. I think that we should be paying attention to what's happening to things in other countries. And I think the reason why is we should be learning from what they're doing in other countries, just like they're watching what we're doing here. But I also find it to be really disturbing, these ties with these far right people stealing slogans and borrowing slogans from our MAGA here, like Stop the Steal, and mimicking these notions of elections being fraudulent and elections being stolen when clearly we know that they weren't. And, and I want to close with this. I say this all the time. Donald Trump's got to get over it, bro. I mean, you lost in freaking 2020. Get the F over it. Get over it. I mean, you lost and then you won. I mean, questionably, but this is kind of where we find ourselves, right? In these conversations where, this Stop the Steal idea hasn't died, and it should be put to bed. There's been no evidence of it. And yet we see that other countries keeping those lies, the big lie, alive and well. Be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. And it starts with, let's get some people elected into office that will actually do stuff like, I don't know, constitutional amendments that curtail a president's power, or do something, damn it, to make sure that we don't have a crazy man in the Oval Office doing whatever the hell he wants to do. I'll see you on the other side. Katie Phang here. The truth matters now more than ever. So hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for watching.